This is Living Healthy with Your Health Potential, where we explore your options for better health. Brought to you in association with The Woman in You.
Hi, welcome to Living Healthy. I'm your host, Cheryl Worthington-Turgeon. When it comes to our food, we're constantly being told what to eat and what to avoid. Unfortunately, the messages we get are often wrong and constantly changing. So what are we to believe? Today we'll be talking to author and lecturer John Kozinski about diets, dieting, and what our food is doing for and against us. John was a faculty member of an international natural health education institute in Massachusetts for 27 years and director of a Connecticut Natural Health Center for 11 years. He currently lectures and provides individual health counseling along the Upper East Coast and Chicago. Maybe we could start really talking about how food actually heals the body.
Sure. I've been involved almost close to 40 years teaching and counseling people, primarily about food, but also lifestyle and healing practices. And in the last particularly 20 years also introducing herbs and also supplements as needed. So food is there's two ways of looking at food. There's a few different ways, but the two major ways that food affects us is, one, food gives us energy. We run on the food. Mm-hmm. So if the energy we get from food is good, then the energy that we have also is vital and full and vibrant. And if it's poor quality energy or running on poor quality fuel, then our energy suffers, or if there's not enough of it. Second thing is that we're made out of food. So literally made out of food, whether that be Twinkies or burgers or salad. We're made out of the food we eat, so that there's been a tradition all throughout the world of food. And the approach that I use is, I call a macrobiotic approach. The original meaning of that word is longevity. And it came from Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, who coined the phrase, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." And so that tradition was all throughout the world. And that tradition included varieties of foods that people needed for nourishment, both animal and vegetable. The modern approach to macrobiotics using food as medicine has been focusing on more like I call a fasting diet, where you minimize what people are eating for cleansing and certain conditions that can be helpful. But food as medicine takes on another type of angle when we're looking at from the food that people are eating. There's a lot of evidence from ancient times that food is one of the major factors, along with lifestyle and thinking, that affects your health. Mm-hmm. And so in the modern view, they've looked at this from the view of nutrition. And the traditional view is the view of energy. All food gives different kinds of energetic effects on the body.
Could you possibly contrast, say, the energy of raw food versus that of cooked?
Well, the thing that we could look at is first that the two ways of looking at food is the modern nutritional view is looking at the parts. It's a partial view. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's taking things apart, looking at protein, fats, vitamins, and looking at that and trying to see, how that affects us. And a lot of good information has been discovered by looking at the parts. And the traditional view is looking at the whole. The interesting thing about looking at the whole effect of a food is it includes the parts. So we could also look at nutrition that way. So a lot of people will say that raw foods has more energy to it than, say, cooked foods, but that there's something a bit off about that, in that we are not what we eat totally, we are what we digest. So that if you have energy from food because you digest that food, human beings don't have the ability to digest fully raw food. It has a benefit in people's diets, but they can't digest it fully because we don't have a rumen. A rumen is a stomach which has bacteria. A cow has 4, so it can digest grass. Humans can't. And we can't digest a whole raw diet. So what happens is when people go on things like raw diets for healing, they're fasting because they're not extracting nutrition from the food. And because there's a lot of evidence that the junk food we eat, including junk meats, factory farm meats, chemicals, additives in food, bad fats, mostly from vegetables, bad vegetable fats, as well as excess amounts of refined foods like sugars and white flour. These are major causes of illness that have been starting to be documented in the last 50 years that are causing problems. And traditional whole foods like grains, vegetables, beans, natural meats and animal foods, if people eat them, or supplements to replace what you're getting from those foods, are the healing aspects of food. So when people go on raw diets, they usually cut out junk, cut out refined foods. That's the healing benefit. The other healing benefit is that if someone has been overeating really poor quality foods, a temporary fast can benefit them. The problem is if they stay on that diet as the diet, they're really going against what I've discovered is our nature as humans. Humans have been eating all kinds of foods omnivorously for millions of years. The last 10,000 years that included grains, which people seem to have adopted to well. Most people have adopted to them well. Some natural dairy has been introduced in the last 10,000 years. Before that, people were eating vegetables, fruits, natural meats. So people have the problem with the raw foods in the long run is that you lack protein, you lack fats in those diets, you lack vitamins and minerals because they're not in raw vegetables and fruits. And if you eat raw grains, you'll get sick because raw grains are not digestible. So in the long run, people
I
have
just
problems.
have to ask, how do you feel about gluten?
Well, I love gluten. No, I love gluten. Gluten, gluten foods, I think that there's some people who have issues with gluten, and that is really a digestive issue because there's quite a bit of evidence that people have adapted to eating gluten. If it's prepared the right way and if it's in the right form, then people can digest it. They can't digest it when either they were born with a digestive weakness, that's what I call true celiac disease, which is the gluten sensitivity, or acquired celiac. Acquired celiac is when their digestive system has gotten ruined so they can't digest a food that people have eaten for almost 7,000 years. Traditional ways of preparing wheat were to make sourdough bread and to sift the wheat. So nobody ate 100% whole wheat bread in the past. Even from ancient Egypt 6,000 years ago, they were sifting most of the bran out. And that's how they made noodles too. They would sift the wheat to remove a lot of the bran because too much bran is irritating. But now we have all kinds of products that have a lot of bran. They have cakes and cookies and things that someone in good digestion, if they were natural quality, could probably digest them. But those are the hardest to digest. The easiest to digest would be things like the traditional sourdough breads. There are some good companies in Massachusetts. In my neck of the woods, there's a really good company that makes sourdough bread in the traditional manner. And that bread, when people have been off gluten for a while, even people who are born with celiac, many of them can eat that bread because it's totally digested. The way they make sourdough bread traditionally is they let the bread sit with the wild yeast for 24 hours. Now they make yeasted bread, they let it sit for an hour. So you can see there's all kinds of problems with the way we make bread today. So I think there is a gluten issue that people have to stay off it, but often the cure is digestion, helping their digestion, and secondarily, I've been studying the last year's metabolism, because the digestive system is low and the metabolism is low. So things that knock down the metabolism is low-calorie dieting, not eating enough calories, eating certain kinds of foods like some of the health foods that are high in these omega-6 polyunsaturated fats. There's evidence they knock the metabolism down. Eating a lot of junk food knocks your metabolism down because of chemicals, additives, preservatives. And then also stress. All kinds of stresses knock your metabolism down, including lack of sleep. Okay. So, there's a few different ways to approach to restore digestion. One of them is eating food that's easier to digest. So, like for instance, when people have digestive issues, I tell them to limit their raw foods and to learn how to properly cook whole grains by fermentation methods, like soaking long time, like 12 hours, 24 hours, focusing on the whole grains. and making sure that the diet, the rest of the diet, is balanced, either having regular amounts of natural animal foods like meat and fish and chicken, naturally raised, or if someone wanted to be vegan, replacing what's missing from the animal foods with supplements. You can do that. Some people do quite well just replacing what they're getting from animal foods with supplements if they want to be purely vegan or vegetarian.
But I would imagine, again, the digestive system must be working well enough to absorb that from the supplements.
Well, the thing about that, supplements are pretty easy to absorb, and sometimes I recommend supplements made from whole foods and sometimes not, depending on the person. And supplements, there are some supplements that can benefit people a long time and some a short time. Supplements are pretty easy to digest, but sometimes people need digestive aids for that too. And some supplements are short-term, like 3 to 6 months to restore health, and some may be helpful longer, longer term. Because we're exposed to a lot of stresses in modern society today, so we lose a lot of nutrients.
Yeah.
So I used to recommend only foods, but then I discovered after doing a lot of study and seeing lots of people who could benefit that there's a use of supplements because modern living has stresses. So you use up like B vitamins and vitamin C and other things that you need to replace, especially if you live in a polluted environment.
Yes, which most of us do. So what are some of the ways that we can understand food for healing purposes?
So when we could understand food for healing purposes by looking at, first of all, looking at what I call the energetics of food, and looking at what I call the energetics of person. So one of the things I studied many, many years is methods of Oriental diagnosis. And these methods include ways that you could tell the function of the organs by looking at the face, the hands, the feet, how people are acting or moving. You can tell how the body is functioning. And then you can tell what kind of imbalance they have that food can help, or herbs or supplements. So, for instance, if someone has eaten lots of sugar or taken lots of drugs or alcohol or medicines, or someone's been on a very severe extreme diet, that might be a low-carb diet. After a while, low-carb diets can help people temporarily, but after a while the body seems to need carbs. And many people who are teaching paleo diets are now recognizing that people do need carbs. They're starting to add in starches and carbs into paleo diets in the last years. Or someone might have been on a very low-fat, low-protein, vegan or vegetarian diet, or someone might have just burnt the candle at both ends, and with all kinds of things, or, lifestyle, diet, pushing themselves. So they get a deficient, they'll have signs of an energy deficiency. And one of the things I did is I took the understanding of these signs from Oriental medicine and I combined them with modern biology to create, in a sense, a new form of diagnosis. And so that when you look at certain parts of the body, you can tell the body is depleted. For instance, under the eyes, you can see a purple color, where this purple color shows a person has been in stress mode a long time. And many have signs of deficient energy of the whole body function. Maybe they'll have digestive distress. That's a sign of deficiency. Or maybe they'll have circulatory problems. Or maybe they'll have fatigue. Or maybe colon problems. All these are related to deficient energy in the body. And they might have other signs in the body that show the deficiency. Some pressure points I'll check for deficiency of what they call in acupuncture, the energy lines related to the organs, the meridians. And so then I'll realize, well, I might have to work on digestion and correct their diet. So it depends, like if they had been eating something like a paleo diet with very low carbohydrates, the energy source they'll need will be carbohydrates. Properly prepared grains or starchy foods like sweet potato, maybe some fruits and things like that to restore. If someone has been eating a vegan diet and they've been really low on the protein, then you're going to need good protein sources. If they're open to eating natural animal foods, that might be some lighter animal foods like chicken and fish and eggs till they get used to it, and some natural meats. And then many times those diets are low in fat, so they might need natural fats, like saturated fats, which are actually healthy for the body, like coconut oil or natural butter, or unsaturated like olive oil. And if they didn't want to eat animal foods, then I would probably give lots of supplements, which I might do anyway, but I might really be careful to do that, and maybe some vegetarian protein sources to build themselves back up, and some vegetarian saturated fats like coconut oil. If they were eating a raw diet, I'd recommend they start doing things that raw diets often they get worse deficiencies than vegan diets. Really? Because there's not much protein in vegetables and fruits, but you can't extract it fully anyway, and so they'll be more protein deficient if they've done that longer, and so they'll need good quality protein. Sometimes some herbs will help, like I've studied some Chinese herbs and some Western herbs. There's a herb formulas they use, these things in Chinese medicine called patent herbs. They're little pills that are made from herbs. And there's one for deficiency that I'm fond of. I might give that one called 10-taste tea if their digestive system is very weak, or immune system is weak. That works for both. So I'm just giving examples. There's a lot of other things that I might use, but those would be.
Could you tell us about some chronic conditions that food has been known to influence, and maybe an example of what you've experienced in your practice in terms of people that you've worked with?
Well, let me talk about a chronic condition that people don't often think of a chronic condition, and that's cancer. So cancer, some good research has shown that it takes 20 to 40 years for cancer to develop. So it's a chronic disease, and along the way you might have all kinds of other symptoms that you're diseased, you're out of lack of ease, is one word meaning of disease, but it won't be diagnosed for 20 years or 40 years. It just takes a long, long time, so it's a chronic disease. So there's an example of a man I saw many years ago, I think now it was like 15, maybe even 17 years ago, with prostate cancer. So he did part of the medical treatment, and then there's a marker that there's a controversy whether that marker is really clear for prostate cancer called the PSA. It's a blood test. Some people don't think it's really a marker. But anyway, his marker was going up, and so he was doing the medical treatment. The doctor was recommending some radiation. He had already surgery, and so this was going up higher and higher, and so he's a friend from Connecticut, and now he's much older. He's an old Yankee. So I think it was actually more like 20 years ago that I saw him. So the doctor said, well, the doctor had told him, if you do everything I say, I'll give you another good 3 years. And so I think he was about 70 then. So he didn't like that odds, and then the test was going up, so he's an old Yankee. So he said, okay, doc, well, you had your chance. I'm going to try something else now. So I changed his diet, and grains and vegetables and beans and other foods and fish, and put him on at that time, a more simple diet, and he started to change. And then basically he, his PSA marker happened to go down, and he felt better and better and better. And so I think he might have checked later, but he was cancer-free. So cancer is one of the things that if a person still has, one of the aspects of macrobiotic healing traditionally is that it's not the diet or lifestyle or even changes you make that heal, it's basically your own vitality inside your body. So if there's enough vitality and someone doesn't do too much to disturb it, like knock themselves down with excessive things like medical treatment, these people did medical treatment, but they didn't weaken themselves with it. So if you have enough energy inside, that's what heals. That's what we're fostering to heal. And what I discovered over the years, my macrobiotic approach, which is different than it was what I learned, was that macrobiotic means longevity, and according to the philosophy of balance, what they called yin and yang in Asia. So that if you look around the world, what they used for healing was every variety of natural food. From grains to beans to vegetables to natural meat to natural dairy to fish to fruit to sweeteners. It's all available for healing. It just depends on the person. So some people need the cleansing fasting diets that are in some of the books under the and they call that the macrobiotic diet. But now I've come to the realization after a lot of study, research, seeing thousands of people and teaching thousands more, that that's one macrobiotic approach. It works for some people it doesn't. Some people keep doing that, and then it's inappropriate because that'll make a deficient condition, deficiency of nutrients and energy. People who stay on that, I've seen actually people get sick than doing the same diet that healed them. So you have to change as your body changes. It's important to change as your body changes. And I've come to realize that, what people have eaten around the world were basically balanced meals. So they would eat grains, they eat vegetables, they eat varieties and different volumes of animal foods depending on what was available. The person, everybody's a little different in their body type, their what we call in my approach to the macrobiotic diagnosis, they call that your constitution. Okay. So some people may do better with less animal food, some with more. If someone wants to be vegan, that's a personal choice. Then you just have, what I found in the long term, you have to replace the things you're getting from animal food. Because all the cultures around the world ate some. Usually on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis. If they were poor, on a weekly basis. If they weren't, on a daily basis. Sometimes per meal. A friend of mine who now lives in Thailand, he said that he had the opportunity, he came into some money many years ago and did good investments. So he had the opportunity to travel around the world and live with traditional people in isolated places, jungles and others. And he said they all valued some animal food. If they were really poor, they had that one egg at the meal. Or, some animal food in the beans, they had something. So they knew. And the traditional view of that is that has a really strong gathering, building effect. So conceivably, someone couldn't overdo that, especially poor quality animal foods like the 24-ounce steaks, or the bucket of chicken that people get. You could overdo that, but also they're overdoing poor quality. So a lot of times, poor quality animal food. And what I've tried to figure out also, what's the common factor in the healing diets? People swear by vegan, or they'll swear by low fat, or swear by raw.
You could also contrast for us, the most popular one I think right now is the paleo diet. But if you could contrast maybe the paleo, the Mediterranean diet, and the macrobiotic diet, what are the elements that you would want to pull out of those for healing?
Well, the paleo diet has many elements. One of the best benefits of the paleo teaching is that they value natural animal foods. And if you look around cultures, there was a value to the natural animal foods and a benefit from incorporating them. In recent years, they've also incorporated starchy foods. It's not extremely low carb anymore because they realized that paleo is based on the idea of what people used to eat before, millions of years ago, and there were some people who ate a lot of carbs from tubers and they were really healthy. And some people didn't. Mediterranean diet is an interesting diet because in some ways the Mediterranean diet was a creation. And so the modern Mediterranean diet is different than the traditional Mediterranean diet. The traditional Mediterranean diet was, they had grains and vegetables and fruits, but they valued meat. It wasn't low meat. That's why you have prosciutto,
Right.
Those meats and things. That was valued, and depending on the people and how much money they have, people would be very healthy eating, meat, chicken, dairy. That was valued. So there are elements that are very similar. It wasn't a light thing like a few times a week as it's been made out to be. And if you were in northern Italy, it was butter. And southern, it was olive oil. In the middle, both. So it's a little different than what they're putting it out to be, but it has healthy elements. Macrobiotic diet, there really is, what I've discovered is that there's a macrobiotic diet in the books and a lot of people teaching, which is really more a cleansing diet, because even though there was an element from Japan, because some of the teachers introduced that earlier, that diet they were teaching is not what they ate in Japan. What they ate in Japan was fish was valued. 80% of the people were farmers or fishermen. Good amount of all the people lived in the mountains who were farmers. And they ate meat regularly because the animals would come down and eat their crops and they'd kill it. So they valued fish daily and meat daily, and modern macrobiotic diets and books will say fish is optional or once a week. That wasn't the Japanese diet. And the people who had the most longevity were the Okinawans, who valued fish and pork. Pork was a staple every day because of the Chinese influence. So that diet, again, it can be temporary for purposes of fasting. But the way I approach a macrobiotic diet, I say there's a macrobiotic approach to diet. So rather than one diet. So mostly a macrobiotic approach to diet would include grains. If someone had overdone grains, maybe they limit that for a period of time for balance. They lower that. But there's quite a bit of evidence that most of the people around the world adapted to grains. That's the difference in the paleo. Paleo's idea is that grains is a new food. Right. People didn't adapt. But there's a book out there called The 10,000 Year Revolution. It's about genetics and how genetics has rapidly changed in the last 10,000 years. So there are people who adapted to dairy. The majority of people in the world seem to adapt to dairy and to grains. So that's the difference, that a macrobiotic approach would generally include grains and starches. Now the amount would vary. Mm-hmm. Grains are energizing food. A small person is going to eat less concentrated calories than a larger person. Right. A person who is very physically active is going to eat more calories, more grains, more fats. Mm-hmm. I've also the macrobiotic approach by looking at traditional people and studying modern nutrition, especially more advanced nutrition. I came to the realization that saturated fats are more important than unsaturated fats. And the demonization of saturated fats, I think now in Time magazine, a new article came out about that, and there's a new book, called The Big Fat Surprise, I think it's called, that just about how there was a big mistake in demonizing saturated fats. Yes. And then you go around the world and you see all these people eating saturated fats who are quite healthy. So things like coconut oil or natural butter, if you tolerate it, are very good saturated fats. And after that, the monounsaturated fats like olive are good. After that is the secondary. As long as we stay
away from the trans fats, right?
The trans, and limit the omega-6 fats like canola and safflower, whether it be, the cold pressed or not, because they lower the metabolism. And that is the big fat that has entered the modern diet in the last 100 years, the omega-6 fats.
We're just running out of time today, and I have found this just fascinating. I could talk with you for hours. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today. You've been a wealth of knowledge, and I know there's so much more in there. I hope you'll come back and join us again.
Oh, thank you very much.
For more information on John Kozinski, you can visit macrobiotic.com. You can also find John Kozinski on Facebook, or call him at 413-464-2990. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Cheryl Worthington Turgeon. See you next time on Living Healthy.